Inspire this nation with a spirit of justice, truth, and charity. So guide our leaders, especially those who have been elected to this chamber as representatives of your people. Direct our affairs that we may live in peace and glory of your name through Jesus Christ, our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. To the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever.
This house is now in session.
Minutes.
Minutes for the meeting of the 22nd of September 2020 to be confirmed.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be taken as read.
Questions that the aforementioned minutes be
Second,
confirmed.
please.
Questions that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are confirmed.
Announcements by Your Honor the Speaker. Messages from Her Excellency, the Governor General.
A message from the Governor General. By Her Excellency, Dame Sandra Prunella Mason, Dame Grand Cross of the Most Distinguished Order of St. Michael and St. George, Dame of St. Andrew, Queen's Counsel, Governor General of Barbados. A proclamation. Whereas by Section 28A of the Emergency Management Act, Cap 160A, it is provided that where the Governor General is satisfied that a public health emergency has arisen as a result of a person or an animal having a communicable disease or a notifiable disease, the Governor General may, by proclamation, declare that a public health emergency exists. And whereas I am satisfied that a public health emergency has arisen as a result of the presence of a communicable disease or a notifiable disease, now therefore, by virtue of the power and authority vested in me, I do hereby declare that a public health emergency exists in Barbados. Given under my hand and the public seal of Barbados, this 20th day of September 2020, in the 69th year of Her Majesty's reign.
Petitions, papers, government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills, statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motion for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of standing orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, subsection 5, 43, and 44 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. Government business is the order of the day.
Number 3, sir. Resignation of a member.
Notice of the letter of resignation was given on the 22nd of September 2020. I now direct that the letter be recorded in the minutes and that the seat be declared vacant.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that an address be sent to Her Excellency the Governor General, asking Her Excellency to issue a writ for an election to fill the vacancy occasioned by the resignation of the Honourable Member for St. George North.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, the address from the Honourable, the House of Assembly to Her Excellency the Governor General will read as follows. The House has the honour to present our humble duty. By reason of the resignation of His Honour Glenn Arley Clark, Justice of Peace, a vacancy has this 30th day of September 2020 arisen for a member of the House of Assembly for the constituency of St. George North. Accordingly, the House has this day passed this address to be forwarded to Your Excellency, asking you to issue a writ for an election to fill the vacancy, pursuant to Section 5 of the Representation of the People's Act, Cap 12, approved by the Honourable House of Assembly this 29th day of September 2020.
The question is that this motion be passed. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This motion is passed.
Order number 2, sir. In the name of the Honorable Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, to move the second reading of the Public Service Appointment Bill 2020.
Honourable Member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, some famous actor, I believe, used the term once, deja vu all over again. The redundancy is no doubt noted by members of the chamber. But I raise this issue because towards the end of 2007, the Barbados Labour Party administration in that time sought to bring a piece of legislation to Parliament and to the country which would modernize the arrangements in respect of the public service, but perhaps more importantly, deal with an acute and burning issue that has bedeviled the lives of people who have labored in the name of government over the years. Mr. Speaker, at that time, we as a government were about to complete serving 3 terms. And former Prime Minister Oenatha was resolute that we could not face the electorate, that we could not contemplate going back into government, in fact, that we could not seriously think about taking another step unless we had dealt with the public service. I think, sir, that anybody would recognize that our public service and how it operated was a matter sometimes of mystery. Appointments, seniority, supersession. People seemed not to know where to go. And I'm not talking about physically, sir. I'm talking about the fact that at that time our public service constituting, I believe, well over 20,000 people, but being administered by a central agency that was dealing with public service rules and general orders that dated back to the time of Tom Adams. One of the important features of that legislation back in 2007 was a section 13, I don't think 13 in that instance was an unlucky number, which sought to guarantee public servants who had been in a post for 3 or more years their appointment. It was well received. I remember laboring into the night as Attorney General, along with the then Minister, then the Honourable Royal Eastman. We had union representatives at the table. We had the head of the public service and a whole set of other people at the table as we tried to craft a provision that sought to satisfy the needs of the public service. Mr. Speaker, in 2007, when we passed it, it was not perfect. But we recognized then that perfection was not to be our quest, but that it was a more important task that we satisfy the needs of the vast majority of public servants who were in that position for appointment. Our party was committed to that concept then, and we remain committed to that concept now. We would have hoped, sir, that even though we had lost the election, that a succeeding administration would have recognized the noble cause that we had started on and followed through. But instead, that provision, Mr. Speaker, it appears to us, was considered to be nothing more than some kind of political sleight of hand which the last administration felt we were using to satisfy or to benefit Barbados Labour Party supporters. It was not. But I believe, sir, that so deep was their mistrust and suspicion that they determined that they would ignore those valued and important parts of the new Public Service Act. And so instead of getting down to the business of dealing with appointments, the last administration got down to the business of asking which public servant is a B and which public servant is a D. Who that person voted for last election and who they didn't vote for. Mr. Speaker, one of the commitments in the Barbados Labour Party manifesto is headed by 4 simple words: helping people to live. In recent times, Mr. Speaker, you will have heard it repeated often that we come to power or to government to stop poor people from being poor. Helping people to live, Mr. Speaker, is just another way of expressing that same ideal. And what is the context? The context, Mr. Speaker, is that years after we passed that bill and sought to give public servants the right to be appointed, we have come back to government, Mr. Speaker, to find that the same morass still existed. Thousands of public servants in a job, doing the job to the best of their ability, but somehow the unwieldy and Byzantine system called public administration seemed never to be able to ensure that public servants receive the appointments that they deserved. Mr. Speaker, it boggles the mind that we could have tried to fix an ill in 2007, and that 11 years later, when we came to power, the very ill that we tried to fix then was still a specter and a blot on the public service. In our manifesto, sir, we committed to helping people to live. What better way could there be of helping people to live than giving them security of tenure in their jobs? Mr. Speaker, our administration, and I suppose if we don't blow our own trumpet, nobody will blow it for us. So let me take you a little bit further down memory lane. When we came to government in 1994, sir, there was something called a casual worker. And a casual worker was somebody who essentially could be dismissed at pleasure. You were here today and sent home tomorrow. Your work was considered to be casual. Now, sir, language tells a story. You remember when you had the days of the illegitimate child? Because in our thinking, in our law, a child could be considered to be lacking in legitimacy. So he was an illegitimate child. And in our law, as far as the public service was concerned, a person was considered to be a casual worker. Now, we talk about casual dress. We talk about a casual stroll down the street. But the notion that a human being fighting for survival, working day in, day out, to preserve his well-being and his family through earning a living, the notion that that person could be considered a casual worker was deeply offensive to the Barbados Labour Party. Work could never be casual, and a worker could never be considered to be casual either. And we got rid of that Victorian concept, and we gave every employee the standing of being a proper worker in Barbados. So the term came about of a temporary employee. Now, sir, that was the beginning of an evolution in how we deal with the public service. And the thing about evolution is that you recognize that the job is never at an end. But somehow, sir, it is déjà vu all over again, and we are now back where we were in 2007. Mr. Speaker, there is no doubt, sir, that a public servant who goes to work every day in a job and is kept in that job, is paid for that job, there's no doubt that that individual ought to be able to harbor some sense of entitlement to that job. But for all kinds of reasons, those individuals have not been appointed to those jobs. I sat in a meeting with the Honourable Prime Minister in 2018. And in that meeting, the Honourable Prime Minister gave the instruction to the heads of the civil service that they should immediately set about the task of dealing with the appointment of public servants. Now, one assumes that when the Prime Minister speaks, that the individuals are going to jump immediately into action. And I have no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that they tried. But today, we have thousands of public servants who remain unappointed to their jobs, and who need to be helped to live. Those public servants, Mr. Speaker, as they were in the first decade of this century and in all the decades before that, found themselves suffering from the impediment of not being able to go to a bank and say, I want to borrow money for a mortgage. Because the letter that they would bring from the government that employed them would say that they were a temporary employee. Now, sir, you've done many transactions, many mortgages, I know. You may have worked for the lender, but perhaps more often than not, you work for the borrower. But it would not surprise you or any of us that an individual who is going to be lending money, especially over a long term, a 25-year period for a house, will be justifiably worried about the ability of that employee to pay over time if the letter says that they are a temporary employee. So this is something that has cried out for attention. And so, Mr. Speaker, we come to this chamber today to pass a law which will do what we asked to have done, what we committed to do, but because of the inability of the machinery of the public service to get it done, we've had to take it into our own hands. In a way, sir, this is perhaps the highest calling of a parliament, that it seeks, through legislation, to bestow an important benefit on its citizens. A lot of the time, sir, especially over the last 2 years, we've passed a lot of laws saying, thou shalt not. Thou shalt not get bail if found with a firearm. Thou shalt not do this, thou shalt not do that. We've passed legislation to change tax structures. We've passed all manner of laws. And all of them, without doubt, are for the better government of our country. But today, sir, we are perhaps at our best when we pass a law which says, I am giving you status. I am giving you a reason to be proud. Mr. Speaker, I have a constituent that I can think of in particular, and the rules would not allow me to call a name. But that person has been acting in a post in the public service with some responsibility for many years. For many years. In fact, if you speak to his supervisors, if you speak to the people who are to instruct him, they tell you that they could not find a better man for that job. Couldn't find a better man for that job. And that individual, out of sheer frustration, took the position that he was going to retire from the service. Because no matter how hard he worked, no matter the praises of the people who were above him, he could not get an appointment. And the reason why he could not get an appointment, something called the qualification bar. He was qualified enough through experience, through hard work, and through sheer intellect to do that job every single day, not just to the best of his ability, but also to the satisfaction of the people who supervised him. But because he didn't have some particular qualification on paper, he couldn't be appointed. He's good enough to do it, but he's not good enough to claim it as his. How bizarre can we be? For shame. Because if a person is good enough to do the job, but somehow, because he's not qualified, he can't claim it to be his, then you should say, well, you can't get the job at all. those are the kinds of injustices that have operated in our public service for many years. And the time has come for those kinds of things to be brought to an end. Mr. Speaker, I mentioned earlier that we were not in 2007 looking for perfection. And while we have done the best that we could to make sure that this bill covers as many people as possible with a minimum of friction and waste, we know that there'll be some imperfection. But we think that embarking on this particular course of action is not only prudent, it is the decent thing to do. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me tell you how we've approached this bill. And I should point out, Mr. Speaker, that it is not an amendment to the Public Service Act. We have determined that this is of particular significance, and it is therefore called the Public Service Appointments Act. It is a standalone piece of legislation. And in this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, we provide for two sets of people. Firstly, those people who are temporary, and that means that they are not appointed to the public service. And we say that if a person who is not appointed to the public service, but who has been employed in a temporary office or an established office or a combination of the two, for 3 years or more immediately before the 1st of October 2020, then that person is deemed to be appointed to the post. Now let's disaggregate that. Let's break it down into its component parts. The first is the date. 1st of October. Just 2 days away. If you are acting in a post for 3 years or more immediately before the 1st of October, then you will be deemed to be appointed. Now, I know that there are a number of questions and a number of iterations. And that's why I began by saying that we are not getting perfection here. We're not trying to get perfection. Because there are individuals who have been in the public service for many years, and they will, at various times, have acted in posts perhaps for 3 years or more. So a person might have acted in the post for 3 years, let's say from 2010 to 2013. And they may have acted in another post from 2015 to 2018. But we are homing in, as we did back in 2007, on individuals who, for 3 years prior to the 1st of October 2020, for 3 years or more. So the date is important, so we need to fix that in our minds, and you must be in a post for that time. Now, Mr. Speaker, I understand that a query has been made. What if you were the scenario has been put that if you were in a post for 3 years, but you got promoted or reassigned and you are now in a post for only 1 year, what would happen? I understand that some are advancing the argument that you should be appointed to the post that you were in for 3 years. Let me make it clear that that is not the intent of this bill. The intent of this bill is to give you an appointment where you are, as at the effective date, 1st of October, in a post, and in that post for 3 or more years. So go from 1st October and count back. Now, that is an anomaly. It is one of those things that and I'll talk about how we intend to correct that later on in my presentation to the chamber. But it is not something that has gone unnoticed. I'd also like to draw to your attention the provision that you can be in a combination of a temporary office and an established post. And Mr. Speaker, this is especially relevant given what we brought to Parliament in August. In August, we brought a public service order which sought to convert a number of temporary posts into established posts. So someone, Mr. Speaker, might have been in a temporary post as at the date of that order, but once that order was made, that person's post now becomes established. So that person would have been in a single post for 3 years, but let's say for the first 2 years and 9 months, it was temporary, but for the last 2 or 3 months, it's been established. Then that person gets the benefit of an appointment to that post. But in relation to temporary public servants, there's a double benefit. Because by virtue of this bill, you are at the same time being appointed to the public service. Now, it goes without saying that you can't be appointed to a post unless you are also appointed to the public service. But even though they amount to the same thing, it is worthy that the two separate points should be noted. Because a temporary person is a person who has not been appointed to the public service, so they get the benefit of an appointment, one, and an appointment to the post that they were in for 3 or more years. The other category of person that we deal with is a person who has been appointed to the public service. That person who, having been appointed to the public service whenever, sometime before, that person who is in a post that they're not appointed to for 3 or more years prior to immediately before the 1st of October, then that person also gets the benefit of that appointment. So those are the two categories of people. People who are not appointed to the public service, and then people who are appointed to the public service. They're dealt with separately because their characteristics are different, but the effect is the same. In each case, if you're in a post for 3 or more years, immediately before 1st October, then you will get the benefit of an appointment. Now, Mr. Speaker, as I said, it is not lost on us that there are individuals who will have been acting in posts for significant periods of time, and perhaps through hard work and so on, they might be promoted, they might be put in another post, but this bill is not going to deal with that individual. That individual doesn't get that benefit, but I'll come to those individuals later. The other important thing, sir, is that we came face to face with some realities. We recognize that there may be instances where, even though a person might fit this bill, no pun intended, but that there may be reasons why such a person may not be entitled or may not be considered for appointment. And we've tried to isolate, probably not a good word to use in today's COVID media, but in Section 6, we've tried to isolate the circumstances where we feel a person ought not to be considered for appointment. You could call it that, I suppose. So at 6, sir, 6.1, it says, a person shall not be eligible for an appointment to the office under Section 5, where that person, and there are 5 exceptions noted. 1, where you are presently the subject of a disciplinary matter commenced pursuant to the Public Service Act or any other relevant legislation. So if, as at that time, the 1st of October, you are the subject of a disciplinary matter we are in effect withholding your right to appointment until that disciplinary matter is resolved. Now, Mr. Speaker, there's good reason for this. Because of the slow and cumbersome way that the public service deals with disciplinary matters, there are a large number of disciplinary matters that have been pending for quite some time. In some instances, the individual may be found to have been guilty of misconduct. In other instances, when it is eventually disposed of, the individual might be found not to be guilty of misconduct. What we're saying is the question of your right to an appointment would be deferred until that matter has been resolved. So if at the conclusion of your disciplinary matter, you are found, may I use the word, Mr. Speaker, to have been guilty, then you don't benefit from this right. But on the other hand, if you are found innocent, if you are discharged from that disciplinary matter, then you benefit from your appointment and you will be deemed to have been appointed as at the 1st of October. The other category of person, Mr. Speaker, is a person who is the subject of an ongoing criminal matter. Public servants are just like anybody else. They find themselves running afoul of the law and find themselves facing criminal charges. And if a person is therefore facing a criminal charge as at the 1st, then that person will not benefit from the appointment. But the same principle holds true. If you are exonerated of that charge, exonerated from that charge, then you will be appointed retroactively with effect from the 1st. And there's yet another category of exceptions, Mr. Speaker, and that will be a person who has already been convicted. Our law, Mr. Speaker, allows for the expungement of a criminal record. And that particular statute is the Criminal Records Expungement Act. It is a piece of legislation that was carried through this Parliament by former Attorney General and former Chief Justice of Barbados, Sir David Simmons. And it revolutionized how we deal with people in Barbados who, though they have run afoul of the law, have acted in such a way thereafter to show that they had, what's the nice word we use? Reformed. Because we felt that it was wrong when a person has turned their life around, that they should be forever held to the impediment of being considered to be a criminal and have it written across the forehead, sir, in indelible ink. And that Criminal Records Expungement Act says that where your criminal record has been expunged, for all purposes, you are deemed not to have that conviction on your record. Now, when we combine that particular legislation to this scenario, sir, it is obvious that the only way to deal with it would be to provide that if you have a criminal record, but you have not taken steps to have it expunged, then we're not going to appoint you. But at some point in time, you may have it expunged, and if that happens, if you get the benefit of the expungement, it relates back, the doctrine of relation back, and therefore you would benefit from that appointment retroactively. The other person, the 4th category, is a person who is on medical leave and, not or, and leave for 3 months, sorry, a total of 3 months in any one calendar year, and you've been sent to the medical board. If the medical board finds that you are not fit for work, then really an appointment is otiose. If the medical board finds that you are fit for work, then the appointment would relate back. And from effective 1st October, you would benefit from the appointment. And the final category, sir, are individuals who in their personnel records have a negative report or a report of conduct which contravenes the Public Service Act or any other enactment. So that person, if you have negative reports, if you've contravened the regulations, then we're not going to reward bad behavior, plain and simple. So you would have to be appointed in the ordinary course of things. We're not saying that you can never be appointed. You can be appointed in the ordinary course of things, but you will not benefit from this particular appointment. Now, Mr. Speaker, perhaps I should digress a little or refer back to the 2007 legislation. That legislation, Mr. Speaker, used different language. That legislation said that if you were in the public service in the post for 3 years or more, you were entitled to the post. So it gave you an entitlement. But that entitlement then had to be actuated or activated by the public service, because the public service then had to go through a whole set of stuff where you're qualified, this and all kinds of things. And if you're not qualified, you have 2 years within which you can go and qualify. A whole set of things happened thereafter, which may or may not have seen you getting the benefit of your appointment. We're not prepared, Mr. Speaker, to adopt that stance on this occasion, because we know that there are people who would have been entitled back then but still have not got the benefit of the appointment in 2020. So the language that we're using here, sir, is the word deemed. So we're not saying you're entitled. We're saying that you are deemed to have been appointed. It is a firm and strict statement of your status. Effective 1st of October, you are deemed to have been appointed. The only thing that the Ministry of the Public Service has to do thereafter is to, when they go through their records, they will be able to give you a letter saying that with effect from the 1st of October, you are appointed. Plain and simple. And what post you're appointed to. Now, of course, Mr. Speaker, you will remember that, because I think you used to be a public servant eons ago. And you had this concept, you don't look it, but we know it was eons. Me too. I meant the don't look it part. And yes, I also worked as a teacher for a year at a place called Harrison College one time. The worst experience of my life. But that's a story of another day, and my students then still love me. But Mr. Speaker, in the public service, there's a concept of something called a vacant post. Now, in the private sector, and I think all of us here have come from the private sector, if you have 10 clerks, and you want an 11th, you hire an 11th. You now have 11 clerks. There's no concept of clerks that are in established posts and clerks that are in a temporary post. You simply hire the number that you need. And if you don't need that many, you reduce the number that you need by terminating somebody's contract. In the public service, we have this thing called established posts, and those posts may be vacant, meaning that there's nobody who is in that post working. But also, there may be somebody in that post working, but they might have been reassigned somewhere, promoted, or something else. So the post is not vacant. It's just that the person who is appointed to it is gone elsewhere. And under our current rules, nobody can be appointed to that post, because we seem to harbor the idea that at some point in time, John Brown or Patsy Brown may come back in that and sit in that chair, so you can't have the body in it. So because an individual is acting in a post that somebody else has, they don't get the benefit of an appointment to that post. Now, recognizing, sir, that can be an impediment in this instance, we have taken the step in this legislation of saying, if there is no vacant post or if there is no established post to which you can be appointed, this act, by virtue of being passed, creates what is called a supernumerary post. Now, I know that the public listening probably by now getting a little bit confused as to the jargon. In fact, I believe if this wasn't my second bite at the cherry, I'd probably be a little confused at it myself. The concept of a supernumerary post, supernumerary, if you go back to grammar, numerary meaning number, and super meaning over the number. So if in the public service, in a particular area, you have 3 posts of permanent secretary that are established, you can create a 4th post, and that 4th post, until it is regularized, is considered to be supernumerary. So, in the context of what we're doing here, we are deeming people to be appointed. But those individuals may not be in a post that is vacant. They may not be in a post that is permanent either. So what we're saying is we're not going back to the public service and asking the public service to prepare another order, because we know how long that takes. We're not doing that. Because we recognize that if we could say to the public service, go and prepare another order to create posts to put these people in, and that is a parliamentary process, well, why on earth would we not do the parliamentary process one time and done? That makes sense to me. So instead of going through the exercise of laying by affirmative resolution a new public service order creating posts, because that might now take another 6 months, we're saying such posts as are necessary to give effect to this bill and give meaning to this bill are hereby created. Plain and simple. We're not doing this in 2 bites. We believe that we can cross this particular chasm with a single leap by saying we are hereby creating such supernumerary posts as are required for this purpose. The other important thing that I want to mention in relation to this bill has to do with the fact, Mr. Speaker, that there are some individuals in the public service who were engaged to do projects. Now, a project by definition is something which has a start and it has an end. And implicit in that is the fact that your expectation would be that at the completion of the project, you will be thanked for your service, given what is your due, and you would go on your way. That's not intended to be callous, but the fact of the matter is that if you hire a carpenter to change your roof, he starts working the day he starts taking off the old roof, and when the new roof is finished, you shake his hand, thank him, and say, job well done, and he goes on his way. In the public service, there are occasions when special projects are required to be adopted. And those projects will have a lifetime. In some instances, it may be short, it may be for 2 months, it may be 4 months, it may be for a year, but it might also be for 3 years. It might be extended for a 4th or 5th year. And there are some specialist areas in government that can see a project going on for an extended period of time. We may bring on an engineer to supervise works in the Scotland district. That's a project. When the project starts, he starts. But when the works in the Scotland district are completed, then the project comes to an end. So it was never the intention, and it is not our intention, that an individual who is in a project post should be deemed to be appointed to the public service. To do so would create an absurdity, because it would mean that when the project is finished, there ain't nothing for John Brown or Inez Brown to do. In Jamaica, we would have to then embark on something called make work, which means you gotta find something. And often the something that you get them to do is so Well, make work. I think you understand what I'm trying to say. So because those projects are contemplated as having a finite lifetime, then a person in a project, even though they may have been in it for 3 years, with effect, for 3 years, immediately before 1st of October, it is not intended that that person would benefit from a permanent appointment to the public service. That would be going much further than we think reasonable. And therefore, a person who is appointed, a person whether appointed or not to the public service, but is in a project post, there is no appointment to give you, because it is not in our contemplation that project posts would in any circumstances be considered as being permanent. Now, I spoke about the anomaly and the fact that we accept we will not have perfection. Yes, Mr. Speaker. There are going to be some people who I concede will be disadvantaged by the operation of this bill. It is not intended to be a slight to them, but we feel that the system can be self-correcting if allowed to do so. But there are a large number of people that we feel it is important to deal with them right away, and that is our commitment. That is what this bill is intended to do. The other people, those people who the trade unions are concerned about, so for example, somebody who has been in the public service for 15, 18, 10, 7 years, and who may have acted in a post for 3 years but is not currently in that post, those people are not ineligible for appointment. What we are saying is that instructions have been given to the public service to redouble their efforts to ensure that those people get what is their due. The challenge, though, which we recognize, has to do with this vexed concept of seniority. So that an individual who might have started working for government, let's say 5 years ago, and has had the good fortune to be in a post for 3 years immediately before the 1st of October. So they joined the public service only 5 years ago, but in a post for 3 years before. They will be appointed. And a person who's been in the public service for 15 years and has acted in all kinds of 3-year posts, but is not now so acting, a person with only 5 years will end up being senior in the public service to the individual who has been in the public service for a number of years. Now, we recognize that this is an anomaly. But firstly, let me say that we are asking the public service, we have directed the public service to redouble their efforts, and repeating it, I said it just now, I'm repeating it, to redouble their efforts to make sure that all of those people are appointed. But secondly, I remind the chamber that seniority is but one factor to be considered in relation to appointments. And so let me put it another way. Seniority is but one factor to be considered in relation to your advancement in the public service. Just one factor. So that a person who is a very good public servant, a person who is a good public servant, can still expect to be advanced when required, when merited, when an opportunity arises, even though a person in the same grade might be senior to them. Now, Mr. Speaker, I well remember our discussions in 2007. Because there were a number of individuals who sought to advance the case for seniority as being the most important factor. In other words, I was here first, no matter how poorly I perform, I was here first, and I'm entitled to the appointment. That was canvassed. But it was rejected. Because we recognize that in the 21st century Barbados, we need to move from seniority to merit. Barbados cannot function in a modern media unless we reward people based on merit. It is a meritocracy. Maybe I should say it again in the hope of garnering more applause. I believe other people can repeat it when their time comes to speak. Sir, in a competitive world, you will succeed based on how good you are. Now, but hasn't that been our experience, professionally and personally? The fact is that I'm sure the member who just banged on his table the longest, his training is in pharmacy. And from the absence of gray in his hair, he's a relatively young pharmacist. But the fact is that there was a time when he joined the professional pharmacy, and he might have been wondering, with all these people who've been here for 20, 30, 40 years before me, how am I going to get ahead? But he got ahead based on his merit. And I'm sure he has gone and left in his dust many people who were pharmacists long before him. And Mr. Speaker, you came to the legal profession before me. And in the area of criminal law, you have left me in your dust. and long may that remain. But the point is, sir, I may be putting a humorous slant on it, but we can't overstate this. Barbados is a meritocracy, and we as public leaders must demonstrate that in our management and recruitment in the public service. Yes, experience is important, and seniority may bring that experience. But in today's media, in order for Barbados to be the best that we can be, we have to focus in large measure on merit. So I want to assure public servants that because we are appointing people with effect from Thursday, that it does not in any way suggest or mean that people, others who are not so appointed, will be left out in the cold. That is not our desire. It is not our intention. But at this point in time, this category of individuals is going to be dealt with, and the public service, protective service, and other commissions will do the rest of the work. Now, let me say something that I believe has been noticed or should be noticed. In this bill, we have specifically excluded the Royal Barbados Police Force and the prison service. The Defense Force does not arise for consideration because they have a special statute that deals with their promotion mechanisms. The question that you will no doubt ask is, are prison officers and police officers not also public servants? And if they are also public servants, then why are we excluding them from the operation of this statute? With good reason, sir. We do not think that in Parliament that we should take unto ourselves the role of second-guessing the Services Commission of disciplined forces. The matter of the promotion of a police officer or a prison officer takes on much greater significance in terms of matters relating to national security and citizen safety when compared, sir, to the things that are the pursuit of other agents in the public service. I do not mean to suggest, Mr. Speaker, that other persons in the public service do not do jobs that are equally important. Don't mean to suggest that at all. But consider this scenario. Consider a police officer, for example, who has been acting in a post for 3 or more years, but has failed the polygraph test. Would you or anyone in this chamber feel comfortable conferring on that individual an appointment by law in circumstances where there may be other important factors that might militate against the appointment? Mr. Speaker, I would not. I would not. So in relation to disciplined forces, in relation to the police, and in relation to the prison, because of the very sensitive nature of those two posts, of the posts in those two organizations, we consider it important that the ordinary course of dealings with the Protective Services Commission should be allowed to carry on without interference. There was an administration, happily now passed, that felt that they should interfere in the promotion prospects of people in the force, that felt that they should, sitting in George Street, determine who in the force should be promoted and to what posts. They even felt that sitting in George Street, they should do it even after the election was won by the Barbados Labour Party in 2018. That is their want. That is their bent. That is how they do business. Not this administration. Matters of citizen safety and national security are of particular importance and need to be dealt with sensitively, and therefore we are happy to exclude from the operation of this bill the Royal Barbados Police Force and the Prison Service, and I ask that you join me in recognizing the special nature of those agencies and the appointments that are made thereto. Now, Mr. Speaker, I am beginning to land. I want to make the point that even though individuals are being appointed by virtue of this act, we are not in any way attempting to denude the various public service commissions of their responsibility. The General Services Commission has to get on with its work. This measure will give them a little breathing space. This measure will take somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 people out of their immediate purview. And I hope that that will be beneficial to them so they can get on with appointing the other people. And Mr. Speaker, you wonder why, I'm sure the Leader of the Opposition wonders why I have to say between 1,000 and 1,500 people. Regrettably, Mr. Speaker, regrettably, the exact number of people who will benefit from this bill is not yet known. We know the minimum amount. We know, sir, that it is going to be at least 1,000 people. But the systems in the public service are so archaic, that we found that it was impossible for anybody to hit a computer key and tell us, this is the number of temporary people you have in post. This is the number of permanent people you have acting in post. Now, it boggles the mind. I do not know, and I wish I knew, I do not know why it is that with such a large number of employees, the public service is not fully computerized to the point where at the press of a button, you could get an answer to the questions. Now, Mr. Speaker, none of us are here to berate the people in charge of the public service. Not one of us. I suspect that the size of the human relations department in a company like Sagicor probably has more people working in it than our public service. I suspect. But I don't think Sagicor employs 2,000 people. Well, the public service of Barbados employs 20,000. Now, I don't mean to suggest that you should have an HR officer for every 100, or for every 1,000, or for every 2,000. But the fact is that our HR practices in the public service must be dragged kicking and screaming into this century, sir. Our mistake, and it was a mistake that we didn't have an opportunity to correct. Our mistake was to perhaps feel back in 2007 that the solution was statutory. We felt that by having more transparent rules, better rules in relation to appointments. I remember the public service bill, it has several schedules talking about how you appoint people, how you hire people, how you discipline people. All those kinds of things are spelled out there. But we didn't take steps to make sure, sir. We didn't take steps to make sure that the particular department of government that had to deal with it was given the adequate resources to do so. And it is a task that is ahead of us, and the Prime Minister, I am sure, will be taking steps in that direction. Our services commissions have done a good job. I believe that the Protective Services Commission, and they have given me the assurance that they're going to resolve all of the police promotions within the next 3 months. We are hoping that they can have it done in 2, but they've said that they will give us all the appointments and so on and promotions within the next 3 months. But this Protective Services Commission, effective 1st of September, approved the appointments and appointment on promotion of 53 immigration officers in one fell swoop. They also did a similar thing in relation to customs. I think the figure in customs may be over 100 people. And when we put the police to that, sir, we will see that the Protective Services Commission is doing a remarkable job. And I want to laud them for their efforts. But the point is that the services commissions can and do work. They can and they do work. We would not have been able to put these people into secure positions if they weren't working. But by getting rid of this backlog, we expect to be able to do more. Mr. Speaker, this administration, and I'm going to wrap up now, this administration has just announced a new housing program which will see houses being made available to public servants who earn less than $4,000 a month. I began by speaking about the commitment in the manifesto, helping people to live. These individuals will now be able to go to a financial institution and say, I want a mortgage. My husband and I, my wife and I, we want a mortgage. I want it in my own name so that I can get on with my life and give my family the security that they need. And what we are doing here today will empower well over 1,000 people to be able to step into that direction proudly. We vow, sir, that we will correct the anomalies. Perhaps the most important mechanism in this direction is a provision that we are borrowing from the original Public Service Act. And we've been calling it the leveling provision. And it provides, Mr. Speaker, that where a person who is now appointed when this act is passed considers that they are prejudiced, by the operation of this act, that they can approach the Governor General, make a case, and the Governor General would be in a position or would take a position on an appointment so as to remedy the prejudice. So an individual who says, look, my seniority is prejudiced, I am prejudiced for all kinds of reasons, he or she can go to, they don't go to the Governor General directly, but they go through the process to the public service, make an appeal to the Governor General and say, I have been prejudiced, and I therefore want a remedy, and that is a remedy that is available. But the point is this, sir. We borrowed this provision from the 27 bill. We borrowed it from the 27 bill because as far back as then we recognized the importance of being able to correct prejudice. There's something called equity. And they say that equity was created to moderate the harshness of the law. And therefore this provision, which is to be found at 7.2 of the bill, is intended to give public officers who feel that they have been prejudiced a right to be able to say to the authorities, please correct this prejudice. It's nothing to be afraid of. It was a provision in the 2007 bill. But so important to us is the concept of fairness. So important to us is the ability to moderate any of the anomalies or any of the effects of the imperfection that we consider this particular provision to be of great importance. We know people will fall through the cracks, sir, but we have to make sure that we are there to capture them. Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, we spent a lot of time passing laws. In many respects, the public may long have forgotten what laws we passed. But I dare say that what we do today will resonate, sir, among individuals in the public service. It will resonate with their families. It will resonate with the people among the people with whom they have to deal, because for the first time, they're being given the security that they deserve. Mr. Speaker, qualifications will not matter. And that's important. We are not saying that you have to be qualified at all. And I know that that may gall some people. I hope that right-thinking Barbadians will see it our way, though. Where an individual has been working in a job steadfastly for years, but then is going to be told you can't get that job because you don't have a degree. Preposterous. So this act says, without regard to the requirement for qualifications, the job is yours. I can think of no nobler task, sir. So you could call it stopping poor people from being poor. You could call it transforming the public service. You could call it helping people to live. Whatever you call it, sir, it is spelled with the same letters as the word decency. And I'm obliged to you for your indulgence this morning.
Honourable Mr. Michael West. Yes, you will have to move it later.
That this bill be read a second.
Honourable Mr. Michael West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just briefly to make some comments, and obviously I am not going to oppose anything that seeks to bring redress to matters of disadvantage to public servants in Barbados. And we are all aware that the system throws up some disadvantageous situations for people who seek to serve honestly and to pursue careers, sometimes by dint of sacrifice as well, and yet they find themselves up against the disadvantages thrown up by the systems or operatives within the system. So I am not going to, on principle, oppose anything that seeks to address that kind of a situation and relieve persons of burdens and difficulties, challenges which they have been faced. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, it would be difficult to do so because one of the leading voices championing the causes of public servants in Barbados, and making sure their interests are better served by the system is a voice that speaks very loudly and clearly in the upper house on these matters, and with which I'm associated closely. So I certainly would not be on my feet seeking to oppose a measure that clearly is intended to correct a situation, unfortunate situation that has existed for many and existed for many years as well. The Honourable Attorney General, however, when he spoke, suggested that the system didn't work effectively and efficiently, the normal system of appointments in a public service, and thereby frustrated the intention of the legislation of 2007, Public Service Act. And that is an issue which we can debate if we chose so to do. I'm just referring to the fact that the Honourable Member for St. Joseph stated his position on it, and that is that the system, the normal system by which appointments are made, read the public service, did not function efficiently and effectively, and frustrated the intentions of the 2007 legislation brought to the Parliament by this party, this administration, when then in office. One would have therefore to issue a word of caution, and one would therefore have to be on one's guard that what obtains in this moment, what obtains today, does not represent a permanent departure from the norm. Expediency sometimes may drive us to take certain actions, but when expediency is behind us, one would expect that we would resort to what is normal and what is expected. Though this government has chosen to do this in this way, and the Attorney General has attempted clearly to establish reasons for why so doing, it is still to be considered a thing of concern that this departure undertaken by an administration represented in this honorable chamber by such numbers is a concern that is real. And I want to be understood clearly, not opposing the appointment of public servants who have obviously been disadvantaged clearly over years. And I understand, I'm secondly saying, that the government is suggesting the normal system, normal method of proceeding about this matter has not been functionally effective, and therefore, out of expediency, we take this route to correct the situation. On top of that, thirdly, I'm expressing the caution and recognizing this as a moment for which we ought to be on guard, because you have a certain configuration in the Parliament of Barbados, and you do not want to know that next week or the week thereafter or next month we're coming back to the Parliament of Barbados and by force of numbers seeking to make departure from that which is norm, which is expected, which is understood, on the basis that perhaps it is not being expeditious in the expression of its function, whatever that it might represent. And I hope that I am understood in that. Mr. Speaker, there is, as with many things, with this coincidence of timing. Now, the Honourable Attorney General told us that the Public Service Act of 2007 was brought here just on the eve of 2008 election, short months before. It was brought here in a state of imperfection, and perfection was not even sought for. It was simply brought here towards end of 2007 and months before a pending election. I am not ascribing motive. I am speaking to a coincidence of timing. I am speaking to the matter of coincidence of timing. I was over there when that measure was brought to the Honourable Chamber and would have supported it because it purported to express itself in the interests of public servants in Barbados. I'm not therefore ascribing any motive of any sort to that act in 2007. Simply pointing, Mr. Speaker, to coincidence of timing, because we are now in the throes, based on what we have heard here today, of an election exercise in Barbados, particularly in the constituency of St. George North. So we have a matter like this being brought in this way, using the mechanism of this Parliament to ensure that it is achieved on the eve of a by-election in St. George North, and indeed, in the mind of some, on the eve of a general election in Barbados not too far down the road. I'm speaking about coincidence, a timing. Honourable Attorney General would be aware that if you reflect that the Public Service Act of 2007 passed in this Parliament several years back, and in the intervening period between then and now, we had another administration in office. And if you describe that administration of being unable or unwilling to put into effect what was intended in the 2007 legislation, then we come to a place where we have to ask ourselves, well then, what of the last 2 years and a half? Why has there been sufficient time to put in place what was intended in 2007, and that for which you castigated the inactivity or inaction of the last administration in the intervening 10 or so years? What has transpired over the last 2.5 years that we have not been able to achieve that which was intended in 2007 using the normal mechanisms of appointment? I'm speaking, sir, about coincidence of timing. Now, the Honourable Attorney General said he didn't know, and no one can tell us what are the numbers we're talking about. Is it 1,000 people, 1,500 people? We don't know. And no one can punch a key in a computer and tell us how many there are. And he laments that. And if that is true, then it is to be lamented. The fact of the matter is this, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Attorney General may not know, and the Honourable Speaker of this House may not know, and the Leader of the Opposition certainly does not know. But I can bet you those out there who are affected by this know who they are. Those out there who are affected by this know who they are. And it is not so much necessarily that I must know who they are, or you must know who they are, or the Honourable Member of St. Joseph must know who they are. More importantly is that they know who they are. And knowing who they are may tend to be indicative of how they're likely to vote in any election which comes around the corner, whether this month or not far from now. Now, I'll say this, and I will be more hated when I say this by the one or two on the other side who hate me. And they're just one or two. The rest of them love me. They're just one or two. You know, the date of 1st October has some significance. Dates have significance. Dates have significance, you know. Mr. Speaker, dates have significance. Dates have significance. We celebrate or commemorate July 26th as a day of significance. November 30th is certainly a day of significance. Days have significance. And I will guarantee you that somewhere in the minds of a few people in this country, there will be the thinking that the 1st of October appointment date associated with this action will loom large in the minds of many. You may not think that. The Honourable Attorney General may not think that. The Leader of the Opposition may not think that. May not think that. But there are the Honourable Attorney General, who was allowed to speak without being disturbed in any way, may not think that. The Honourable Speaker of this House, a man of integrity and high mind, may not think that. The Leader of the Opposition may not think that. But there are just a few in Barbados who may think that this 1st October date is not just chosen by chance, but is a deliberate attempt to associate that date with the passage of this legislation, and that because of that coincidence of timing, it may forever loom large in the minds of those who benefit from these appointments. Mr. Speaker, I will not say anything more on that at all. Now, we speak to productivity in Barbados often, very often. We speak to productivity and the seeming lack of it in the private sector, and often we say particularly so in the public sector. And often when we do, we fail sufficiently enough to speak to matters that conduce to productivity. If you look simply at the environmental issues that are now plaguing the land, several government institutions now affecting the schools, if we speak only to that, we don't stop long enough to ask ourselves, how does the environmental context in which public servants are asked to give service, how does that affect the ability to be productive? I mean, even respect to this, one of the premier institutions of our government system, we don't even give enough attention to that. It is only when people are forced out and can't attend sittings of the House. It's only when people are sick and it begins to show. That's a fact. My voice has completely changed, Mr. Speaker. Completely changed since I've been sitting in that space downtown in the office of the opposition. Totally changed. And there are the symptoms which I also exhibit. And I know there are others who are affected. And I'm not seeking to reflect negatively on that situation. I'm making the broader point that when we talk about productivity in the public service, we don't pause long enough to give attention to the environmental conditions under which we ask public servants to give service in the country. You know when we start to do so? When they walk off the job. When they walk off the job. When they set down the files. And when they leave the desk. and the offices and the media is called in, that's when we pause to give attention to those things. And often, when we come to remedy many of those situations, we see that a lack of a program of proper maintenance of public facilities over the years has now rendered them dysfunctional, and they have to be abandoned, constituting to the buildup of wasted resources at the expense of the public purse in Barbados. We're talking about matters that conduce to productivity. The acting Director General Ministry of the Public Service is quoted as saying something to the effect that, and we all know this, security of tenure greatly enhances the sense of motivation and sense of engagement that people feel. So we expect people to feel motivated, to really feel engaged, feel a sense of ownership, having a stake in the process, being a part of the enterprise in a productive and possible way. If we do not see to the treatment of the things that bother them, security of tenure is an absolutely critical thing. And that's why, despite this mechanism being used here today, despite the departure from the norm, and even in the context where I express a caution that going forward, we do not make this the way we do these things all the time because of our numbers here in this parliament. Despite all of that, I'm prepared to support an instrument that gives security of tenure to people. Now, of course, when it comes to those who serve in this horrible institution, there's no such thing as security of tenure, although some might seem to believe that that's the case. But a rude awakening may be on the way. But for public servants out there, doing their best, seeking to be productive, we have to ensure that they get security of tenure so that, as the Director General would have said, they can have a sense of proper motivation and a sense of engagement. And there are others who speak out of the bosom of the public service unions. There are others who speak out of the bosom of labor, who represent the leadership of labor in this country. And they speak to these things that frustrate people's efforts to be productive in their job and negate the efforts of the system itself to show itself as being one that is highly functional and highly providing a high level of service. Intimidation. Mr. Speaker, can we honestly say that that is behind us and absent from the culture that obtains? Now we can come here and bring legislation, give people security of tenure, and to do other things to improve their situation. And that's good. But on the other side of the issue, we have to be sure that we do what we can to eliminate, or as far as possible, significantly reduce the issues such as intimidation, the threat of transfer. There was one which was made very quickly public of recent time, where one man simply opened his mouth to speak to a matter of, what you call it, PPEs, as we call it, Mr. Speaker, the accessories and equipment necessary to ensure that you're properly protected personally with the threat of the virus knocking around, and raised some questions about that, and in no time at all, transferred way out down the road. That's illustrative of what happens in the culture. And we must vow, as people who are part of the political directorate, that we would not give ourselves to that type of conduct, where by force of power and position, we want to intimidate people and use the threat of transfer. You know, Mr. Speaker, you've been around long enough. You may be an innocent guy, I always say that, but you know you've been around long enough. You've heard the stories and the legend. And the powers that be can put you at a desk, and all you have is a telephone. No work whatsoever. And you sit at a desk in your white suit every day because you gotta come to work. And the powers that be can do that to you. And if they can do that to people at a fairly senior level in the public service, you know what it can do to those who work down the ranks in the public service. You're an innocent guy, might not be as innocent as you, Mr. Speaker. But I've been wrong long enough and close to the system long enough, perhaps a little longer than you. And I have seen expressions of that myself. And I have seen clear cases of that myself. And I have heard words uttered that were intended not to intimidate or simply to transfer, but to destroy people. And that should be removed from the system. And there are enough honorable. There are enough honorable, and I mean that in the very normal sense of its use, not in the conventional sense. There are enough honorable people in this house and in this administration to push to ensure that that type of dynamic is destroyed in the culture around the public service in Barbados, especially in terms of how the political directorate relates to it, and that this business of threat of transfer and intimidation and all this kind of nonsense is put behind us. And the use of this ugly mechanism we call authority or approval, that's really a vicious thing when used against people, even in the ordinary sense of its use. It is not the best kind of mechanism that we can have employed. But then when it is misused, it becomes even more of an ugly feature and specter in life of and culture of the public service in Barbados. Yeah? So you get an authority 1 month, 6 months. You got people, and the Honourable Attorney General spoke of the discipline services of forces in Barbados. It applies there too, but you got people with short stint approvals to work. In those kind of contexts, highly undesirable. In the wider public service, a thing that we need to be able to get past and to find a means of putting behind us, because all of these things serve to demotivate people or to derail people, to discourage people from coming to give a true service to the public. That job security could be used as a means of leverage against people to bend them to your will or to punish them for being opposed to your views or your philosophy or your politics. That job security or the threat of it, the insecurity associated with the job, could be used as leverage against you. We need to put behind us. It's in a context, therefore, of that type of thing. I support the action while expressing the caution that this should not be the way we normally do things, because simply we have the numbers to do it. When casual workers were moved to the status of public officers, I applauded that, was part of the administration that facilitated that as well. And I support everything the Attorney General said in relation to that, not only with respect to capacity to get mortgages and build families and build homes and all kinds of stuff, but I support that wholeheartedly. I don't know that there's a reasoned voice in Barbados that would say anything to contradict. To see people established in this way. But at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, the undergirding philosophy is this. It's not about treating situations. It's not about changing regulations. It's not about improving systems. It's not about treating to physical facilities. At the end of the day, you know what the undergirding philosophy is, Mr. Speaker? I'm sure you know. You know you're a people's person. It's about treatment of people. It's about treatment of people. It starts there. Treatment of buildings is fine. Treatment with reference to regulations, treatment of systems is fine. But the undergirding philosophy is that we have to treat people properly. And any government worth its salt will put people at the core and center of its policies and of its actions, and will do so in the interests of the people and not make the interests of the people incidental to their own interests or to its own interests. The Honourable Attorney General spoke with reference to customs officers who were just established in a post. Where is customs officer 4 or something? I don't know. Can't recall the details. But they moved from a status of merely clerical officers doing immigration, customs work, to that status of customs officers. And he applauded that move. I applaud it as well. I heard the Honourable Prime Minister speaking in her capacity as political leader of the Barbados Labour Party at a recent event in a recent location in the center of Barbados, speak to this. And she gave credit, passing credit, to that wide body of persons called the unions. Well, if I know anything about the matter, I know that there's one voice speaks loudly out of the other house, the other chamber, the other place, Mr. Speaker, and championed this cause and pointed to that anomaly. And the Honourable Senator should be given credit for it specifically, and it should not be clouded or shrouded in any passing comment that attributes the credit to a wide circle of people called union leadership in Barbados. One particular voice, one particular champion of this cause to get those people appointed and to have this legislation that gives the benefit of appointment to these folks also considered. And I think that credit should be given where credit is due. Now, the Honourable Member was appointed to that place by Her Excellency on recommendation from myself. And this also was referenced in a speech in that certain place in the center of Barbados recently. And it was mentioned to illustrate that this business of union people being involved with political parties is not new. But I think why one moves, or why one is appointed, one's motivation when one accepts an appointment is a critical thing. And I will say this, that gentleman who speaks from the upper place on an appointment through myself speaks in the interests of workers and has been given that mandate and helps us all in Barbados to a better understanding of the regulations around industrial relations. And he's also been given the clear undertaking that your voice is to be heard in the interests of workers, even when your voice differs from mine, or even when your voice differs from the party with which you are associated. Your role is to represent the workers' interests and to give your opinion, even when it departs from the party opinion, the party to which you're associated, or the voice of its leader. I want to make that clear, because that is important. Credit should be given where credit is due. Not too long ago, Honourable Member for St. Joseph also said that we established certain posts through legislation in this Parliament, and that we did. And you know, there were certain people acting temporarily in these posts, and the posts have been established. But you know, I would want to scoff on any practice, any intention that brings us to this point, we're having established posts in which people have long been working, that you now say to those people who will be working in those posts, you have to apply for the position. And then, by process of application, interview, whatever, they are caused to leave that position so that others might be facilitated into those posts which have now become established. Mr. Speaker, you were able to follow all of that, right?
Yes, sir.
I will repeat it. Honorable Attorney General calls for a repeat because he didn't understand. We were reminded by his very honorable voice that we established some posts here recently. And the number of posts was clearly indicated as well. And these are posts in which people have been working for years. And I'm saying, I'm happy to applaud the establishment of posts, but I would frown on, scoff at any intention to, any practice of, any illustration of an instance where people who have worked in these posts in temporary capacity are now asked to be interviewed for the job, only to be eliminated by that process, and others brought in to those posts. Now that is clear English language. Even a Combermere boy can understand it. Even, you see, let me repeat that, because I'm not talking anything about 1st October. I ain't saying anything about 1st October. I am making a reference to that which the Honourable Member of St. Joseph also referred to himself. He said we brought legislation here a little while ago that established a number of posts, and that is correct. And it was a good thing to do. All I'm saying, I will scoff at any practice or intention. Any instance where a person was serving temporarily for a long time in those positions which were not established. Now you've established those posts. I know these don't back then. You've established those posts. People have been asked to apply for the jobs in which they've been working for a while. And then by process of elimination, they go out the door and you bring in your friends and supporters. Now, if you don't understand that, I can say it again. I will say it again if he doesn't understand. If the honorable member does not understand that. But I know.
On a point of,
yes.
On a point of number 12, elucidation and clarification, let me make it clear. Because it is the member who does not understand whether the post has been established last week, last month, 150 years ago. As long as you have been in it with effective 1st October, as long as you've been in it for 3 years, it is yours. There is no interview. So we created posts in August. And if anybody has been in those posts for 3 or more years, you are deemed to be in the post. So I'm having difficulty trying to understand what the Leader of the Opposition is saying. As long as you fit the criteria, the post is yours, there's no interview, there's no application. So maybe there's a good reason why I'm not understanding what we're talking about, because neither does he.
Can you talk to me, Honourable Member?
I assure you, Mr. Speaker, I understand clearly what I'm saying. And there are those outside of here, if none in here, there are those outside who understand what I am saying. And I can introduce you to some, Mr. Speaker, who haven't seen posts in which they were working temporarily, now established, have been asked to apply for those posts. You want, Mrs.
Not in this.
Mr. Speaker, I am not talking anything but in this. He is understanding what he wants to understand. Who is he? He, the Honourable Member for St. Joseph.
Continue, Honourable Member, please.
You know, Mr. Speaker, I will depart perhaps for a moment from this because there are those on this side, on that side, who seem to think that they can do what they please and get away with it. He is an accepted form of expression in English, a pronoun which refers to an identified person. If I have said the Honourable Member for St. Joseph, if I have said the Honourable Attorney General, I am entitled to say he. And they do it. And they do it from top to bottom. They do it in referring to him. They do it. And nobody says anything. Yeah? The point I'm making, and from which I will not be derailed, the point I'm making, and from which I will not be derailed, is you come in here a few months ago, you established posts, and people were working temporarily in those posts. You know? And all of a sudden those posts are established. You say you have to apply for the post because you're temporary. Apply and then you're eliminated. And others can be brought into the now established post. I'm talking about the legislation of a couple of months ago. I understand what I'm saying. And if they don't, in due course, they will. You can trust me on that one, Mr. Speaker. Now, a couple of things further I would like to say. The commission report of the Constitution Review Commission, this would have been the fourth commission, made a recommendation which I consider to be one of significance. And it had to do with the public officer and with reference to fundamental rights and freedoms. And if I may quote briefly, Mr. Speaker, at 12.62, the attention of the Commission was drawn to Section 21(2)(c), which permits restrictions upon public officers or members of the disciplined forces. Quote, in the enjoyment of freedom of assembly and association, in particular to form or belong to political parties, or to form or to belong to trade unions or other associations for the protection of their interests. 12.63, sections of the public service most affected by this provision readily concede that unrestricted freedom to engage in partisan politics by all public officers, especially senior public officers involved in policy formulation and execution, could lead to serious conflicts of interest and awkwardness at certain levels and result in great and unwelcome compromises to the impartiality of the public service. Goes on to cite that there are parties who, aggrieved by this, argue that there are some categories of public servants who are not affected by the sections in as serious a manner as other public servants. For instance, persons who are employed by statutory corporations, statutory bodies, other statal and parastatal organizations are generally not prevented from participating in partisan politics. The discrimination they contend affects adversely some of the most talented, competent persons within the country. And this is seen as a woeful waste and a patent loss to the political and electoral process. I'm going to skip down to the recommendation at 12.69, and that is that restrictions on the fundamental rights of persons should be limited to persons and circumstances where contingencies relating to a specific post make such terms and conditions of service reasonable and justifiable. All that is saying, Mr. Speaker, and persons can refer to it in the Ford Constitution Review Commission report, that there are some categories of public servants who should not be prevented in terms of the expression or the claim on their fundamental rights and freedoms from participating in the political process. And I support that. And I want to state here clearly from this side that that is something that should be looked at. One can understand certain public service positions being prohibited from participating in the political process, but certainly that should not be a general prohibition. and that there are talents and there are skills, there's certainly the passions and the hearts to be found in the bosoms of many in the public service who would like the opportunity to openly participate in the political process, and it would not necessarily affect the ability to serve the people of Barbados. I want to put that on record. There's also a call made way back in 2004, and that, I think, came out of the report of the National Commission of Law and Order headed by Roy Marshall, that there should be some form of public service college or institution established in Barbados. Effort to mount an institution, a college, a facility, an entity that caters to the effective and proper training of public servants. I support that suggestion in principle. I make a call for that. Look, there have been a lot of people who have been exiting the public service in recent years. I have heard many a comment to the effect that people are disaffected with the goings-on in the public service for various reasons, some of them related to political dynamics, etc. People have been opting and going on early retirement. I have heard comments even from people in government, last administration as well as this one, about the deteriorating quality of the service offered by the public service in Barbados. Now, I'm not critiquing that. I'm saying I've heard those comments. But I'm also saying that the public service is a critical entity in what we do, the biggest employer of labor in Barbados. And if we're talking about improving the skills, the quality of service, then we've got to talk about improving the skills of those who serve in the public sector in Barbados. Some form of institution, some form of facility that caters to that. That goal is, to me, desirable. People benefit from academic training in other institutions, but I believe that the public service provides it requires a certain kind of ethos. It provides a certain kind of service which is critical to what we seek to achieve in terms of our national developmental goals, and critical as well to the better performance of private sector interests and investment interests. And public service, therefore, can benefit from specialized training. Of course, anything you conceive of may come with a cost, but there are ways of treating to the cost. There's no widespread availability of all kinds of technologies. Perhaps, as the Commission did recommend, in fact, it is something that could be pursued in the context of the region, another area of functional cooperation, and perhaps it could be an institution through which the Barbados itself can earn foreign exchange through others who come, or who come under the purview, or who come under the training offered by this type of institution. I believe it is something to be considered. We can't simply be thinking of how we can make the public servants feel a little bit better so we can catch a vote or two. I think we've got to be thinking also how we can make them better so that they can improve themselves and improve the service and thereby improve the country. And lest I offend further, Mr. Speaker, I think I am going to stop.
All right, Member St. Peter.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The last speaker, I don't know what's the pronoun to use because we've spent a lot of time talking about pronouns. He, him, I'm not sure, but the last speaker, who is the Honourable Member for St. Michael West, talked about friends and having a few friends over here. I just want to bring to his attention Luke 6 guides the Barbados Labour Party, and we love our enemies. so he does not have to worry about whether or not he is loved on this side. Mr. Speaker, the bill that we debate today is an important one for a number of reasons. And I will begin by saying that the principal reason why this bill is important, the principal reason is that it is the right thing to do. The Labour Party operates based on that principle. And if I, not to be distracted, but just to speak to the question of why no, why not in the first 2.5 years? I just want to remind the people of Barbados, through you, Mr. Speaker, because I think the Honourable Member for St. Michael West wants to forget, and I get the impression that he wants to cause people to forget that we've spent the first 1.5 years stabilizing this country. And the people of this country who I interact with recognize that we've spent the first 1.5 years stabilizing the situation that we came into office and found. Because almost without fail, Mr. Speaker, people say to me, man, we know that we would have been really on the way up, but COVID came. Because after 1.5 years, so around or about the beginning of this calendar year, we then had to address our minds to dealing with a real situation. A situation that has caused the death of, is it 1 million? 1 million persons globally. 1 million persons globally. And all the commentators say that that number is probably an underreported number, because there may be others who have not been captured because they were not tested. So we spent 1.5 years stabilizing the economy, because we recognize, like all democratic socialists recognize and understand, that in order to create a better life for our people, we need to make sure that we can pay and support that better life. So we have to make sure that the economy is put in a position that allows us then to take off and move. At the airport, we are about to do some work on the runway. Well, it's going to happen at some point. Some work has to be done on the runway. And you know, Mr. Speaker, the reason why you have to make sure the runway is good is because a plane can't fly before it takes off. It has to take off in order to fly. And so the runway has to be good. We've spent, Mr. Speaker, 1.5 years making sure that the runway was good. And in that 1.5 years, while stabilizing the economy, we also were able to give public servants a 5% pay increase. We said to public servants in our manifesto, well, in our campaigning, that we were so committed to giving that increase that even if we could not reach an agreement, we would go ahead and give the increase anyway while we were still in discussion. That is what we were doing in the period leading up to this point. We are now approximately halfway during this financial year. And the Honourable Member for St. Michael West, I think he still remembers how the financial year works. He understands that this is now 6 months into the year. I believe he still understands. Sometimes from his utterances, I almost said ramblings, but that would not be nice. But sometimes from his utterances, I get the impression that he is either forgetting or wants not to remember. But halfway during the financial year is always a time, well, it's usually a time, because the 10 years of the last government is not really anything that we could use. It's not really anything that we can use to gauge good governance by. But under normal circumstances, this is the point in time when we would make assessments about significant moves going forward. And so the choosing of this time is not mysterious. It is not something that was delayed. It is not something that should be postponed. It is the right thing to do, and this is the time that we are going to do it. The public service in Barbados has been described using all kinds of terms. And one of the terms that I heard just before coming into office and then taking up the role of a minister in government was the word Hollywood. Because people both in the public service as well as in the public domain outside of the public service said, well, everybody, when they talk to you, when they send you a letter, this thing acting. And I've been told by a number of persons, but the only place that there's so many actors is in Hollywood. This government, I'm not going to waste time on George Street. I'm not going to waste time on George Street. The Prime Minister uses all the cricketing analogies for that, the night watchmen and all those kinds of things. But I think that is a waste of time. And the people indicated that. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, I know that the honourable member, well, we're not supposed to hear sides, but my left ear picked up something just now. The matter of our numbers in this honourable chamber, I want to make something very clear to this honourable chamber. The people of this country spoke in May of 2018. Not only did they speak in a way that conferred on the Barbados Labour Party 30 seats, that gave us 30 seats, all the seats in this honourable chamber, but when we compare what took place in May 2018 with what took place in 1999, when the result was 26-2, what we realize in 2018 is that the proportion of people who made the statement, the proportion of people who voted and made the statement was significantly greater. And Mr. Speaker, I submit to you, and I submit to those who voted, that they were sending a clear message. They were saying to us two things. One, the people who were there almost destroyed the country. They almost rubbished this country. And they were saying to us, we are putting you in office, not in power, but we are putting you in office to correct the wrongs of that administration. And I'm very clear, the people in St. Peter say that to me. And talking to people from across the country, that is what they've said. They say to me, when I say to them, you know, there are certain things that it is a little difficult to move quickly. You know what they say to me? But you got the numbers. We put you in there to fix that. That is what the people are saying. This matter of persons not being appointed, being left to act. I have officers in my ministry who I have tried to persuade. When we are in meetings talking to people, try not to say acting. because it just sounds so unprofessional to me. So I am introducing officers from my ministry. And I say, well, I introduce myself and I say, well, you can introduce yourselves. And they say, I am Admin Officer 1 acting. I am Chief this acting. That does nothing positive for the mental outlook for the person saying it. And this government is very careful to recognize that we have a responsibility to people and to treat them as human beings, to recognize that people want to lead fulfilled lives. They want to contribute to the building of the country. They want to contribute to their own development. They want to contribute to the development of their families. And so we have to treat them like human beings. We have to recognize, and I'm going to say almost every time I speak, I hate the word labor. Because human beings who are at work in the public service are not just providers of labor. They are human beings who wake up in the morning, who have to make breakfast, or stop by a shop and buy, like the Honourable Member for St. Lucie, a few fish cakes that he shares with me from time to time. I'm not saying that because he doesn't make breakfast, but he likes fish cakes. But there are some people who do that in the morning because we're human beings. We are human beings. And we have to treat the public servants of this country as the human beings that they are. The Honourable Attorney General spoke to the 2007 Act. And you know, in many instances, Mr. Speaker, as the successor MP of the Prime Minister who drove that 2007 piece of legislation leading the Barbados Labour Party, I feel and recognize in my body and in my mind that what we are doing here today is really completing some unfinished business. It is completing some unfinished business. And you know, we talk about timing. Well, we don't talk about timing. Not he, but the Honourable Member for St. Michael West talks about timing. That 2007 legislation came just before the general election. This Barbados Labour Party has determined that we are not going anywhere close to another general election before we do something that is so right, that is so in order for the people of this country. This time has come. We are cleaning up or tidying up that unfinished business. Because all that we talk about government being a continuum, the last administration did not have the decency to recognize that government is indeed a continuum. And so when a government that you succeed has decent, good legislation enacted and on the books, you really have a responsibility after the people have voted for you to keep faith with those people. The last government didn't do it. It falls to us, Mr. Speaker, to clean up the unfinished business of our previous administration when the Barbados Labour Party formed the government leading up to early 2008. When I speak to public servants being human beings, you know, there are some people who can go to the bank, apply for a loan, get asked for a job letter, go to their employer, and get that job letter. People both in the private sector as well as in the public sector. The persons, Mr. Speaker, to whom this bill applies are not able to enjoy something as basic and as fundamental as that. The ability, Mr. Speaker, to get a loan in order to improve your house, to buy a piece of land, to buy a house and land, to do those things that we consider necessary to improve our lot in life. These people are not able to benefit from that. And it is ridiculous, Mr. Speaker, that a person can be working in government for 5, 7, 10 years, 12 years, and not be in a position where they can comfortably improve their situation. That is an indecency that this government will not tolerate. And so this morning, Mr. Speaker, we come to this honorable chamber to change that. We are not going to allow the good workers of this country to have to suffer through that kind of a situation. And even though we are in the midst of a pandemic, and even though earlier in this sitting you read a proclamation from Her Excellency, we are not going to allow even the pandemic that has killed over 1 million people to stop us from treating public officers like human beings. Those matters of the uncertainty that not being appointed creates, that not being appointed engenders, allows for all kinds of bad feeling, mischief. It places people, it creates a lot of issues in the industrial relations climate. Because persons who are not appointed, if they feel hard done by, are cautious about bringing bad treatment to the fore. They don't want to speak up because they're not sure of what will happen, what will be done about their tenure, because they're not appointed. So it causes people sometimes to suffer in silence, and people should not have to live through that. That acting situation over such a prolonged period demotivates workers. And so, Mr. Speaker, I have no hesitation whatsoever in supporting this bill before this honorable chamber this morning, this afternoon. There are a number of elements to the bill. The Learned Attorney General spoke to many of the important ones, but I want to repeat section 5.3 of this bill. The matter of supernumerary office, and I'm glad the Honourable Member of St. Joseph explained it. He is the one who is very good at language, and some of these words I can't even pronounce properly. But I do know that this clause is one of the most important clauses in this bill. Because, as the Honourable Member said, there used to be a time, and if you speak to the trade unions, as particularly the one that represents most of the public officers in this country, and I want to applaud the National Union of Public Workers in this regard. As I thought about the union, thought about a parable in Scripture, which sometimes we refer to either as the importunate widow or the unjust judge. And I am a little bit careful in using that parable because there's both the importunate widow, the persistent widow, but also the unjust judge. But I want to be very clear. I consider the NUPW to be the importunate widow. They have been persistent in pushing for this. The unjust judge would have been the last government who did not take them on. We have come to office to make wrong things right. But I want to congratulate the NUPW for their work in pushing this agenda. And to say to them what I know they have recognized. This is a true Labour Party. This is the original Labour Party. This is the true Labour Party. And I think the NUPW, I know they can't say it publicly, probably, but I know that they will understand that this is a party that they can speak to, speak with. The Honourable Member for St. Joseph spoke to the customs officers for. I remember well when that decision was taken. They were representing, we sat in the Senate chamber in Bridgetown, and they represented that these officers were doing the work for many, many years, classified, I think, as clerical officers, but doing the work. The Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, the Honourable Prime Minister, as the successor to the Labour Party leaders across from Grantley Adams, determined on that occasion that it was an injustice that needed to be corrected as quickly as possible. And we are able to say today that those officers have been appointed, and even though we had to create the position, Customs Officer 4, to make sure that they were treated with the dignity that they deserved, with which they deserved to be treated. But the matter of the superannuary office, public officers had to wait until there was a vacancy. And Mr. Speaker, in spite of the ramblings you heard just before he spoke, just before he started to speak, it is true that the wheels of government turn very slowly. And there are people who are left hanging, for want of a better word, onto a hope. They're working 1 year after another, after another, after another, but they can't be appointed because they're told there is no vacancy. Not because there's not work to be done, because the people are turning up every day and are doing an honest day's work. But there is no vacancy that has been created. And so they cannot be appointed because you can't be appointed where there is no vacancy. This clause in this bill, Mr. Speaker, moves past that very inhuman approach to industrial relations and human resource management. It says that if you have been working in your position for 3 years, it means that your work is necessary. Because if it wasn't necessary, you wouldn't be there for 3 years. And so if your work is necessary, and if it is not project-based, in other words, if you're not working in a situation that has a clearly defined beginning and end, it means that you are necessary in the position. And so this bill, once passed in both houses of Parliament, will say to those public officers, will say to the Ministry of the Public Service, that you have been acting, you've been doing the work, then your post has been created. It is deemed to have been created, you are appointed in the post. And Mr. Speaker, I think that is a revolutionary aspect of this bill. And like the Honourable Attorney General said, it is probably what was missing in the 2007 bill, but we have sought, because life is about growth, life is about improvement, life is about making sure that if you make a mistake in the past, you can correct it in the future. And so, while we make no claims to perfection or omnipotence, omniscience, we are clear that once we identify weaknesses, once we identify errors, we will make the decision to make the correction as we move forward. And so that has been corrected, and I think we are now on a good path to make sure that the workers of this country are taken care of in the decent way that they ought to be taken care of. I want quickly, Mr. Speaker, before I close, just to mention a few things. There are some issues in the public service that have to be corrected. There are issues of productivity, and in my 2.5 years, almost 2.5 years, working in the public service and with public officers, I've recognized that some of the issues of productivity have to do with leadership in the public service. There are good workers in the public service, excellent workers. As a matter of fact, when I became minister responsible for labor and social partnership relations, as part of my orientation, my officers showed me some of the work that has been done by the ministry and by other ministries. And I said to them, but the public doesn't know about a lot of this work that you have been doing. One of the weaknesses in the public service is that there seems to be, well, there is not officially, but there's some secrecy shroud that stops the public service from sharing a lot of the information widely. Known to a few sometimes, but not shared widely. So there are a lot of good people, and there's good productivity, but there are challenges still. And some of those challenges have to do with leadership within the public service. And I want to call, Mr. Speaker, for a greater focus on the training of those who will lead in the public service. Persons called to serve cannot become leaders only because they've been in a position for the longest period of time. They must, and the Service Commission, Public Service Regulations of 1978 speak very clearly to this. There are a number of areas that have to be taken into consideration. General fitness, seniority, basic educational qualifications, special courses of training, letters of commendation, duties to which the person has knowledge, duties that you're fit for, that you have, that fall within the duties of the post. So that seniority is only one of the areas. And the time has come for leaders to be real leaders. My father told me on a number of occasions that there are persons 40 years old who have 40 years of experience. And there are people 40 years old who have 1 year's experience 40 times. Not everybody who has been around long is capable of going to the next step. And we have to get to the point in the public service, if we are to modernize, if we are to move forward, if we are to move the country to the point where, as we've agreed, we're the best place in the world to live, to work, to do business, to enjoy life, to retire ultimately. If we're to reach that stage, then we have to recognize that in all areas of our country's activity, including in the public service, leadership is going to be important. And that leadership must be leadership that is equipped to motivate, to coach, to guide, and to be effective. So that is an area that needs to be focused on. I have recognized that the lack of leadership is holding back some good public officers who want to soar, who want really to contribute to nation building, but are held back by people who feel that their incompetence is going to be shown up. There are not many of them, but there are enough to cause us to have to pay some attention to that area. Leadership and allowing younger or more capable, even sometimes older people, to really do what they are supposed to do. There's an area that I must speak to before I sit, and it relates directly to this matter of people who are acting A lady came to my house on Friday night, on Sabbath, in tears. She's been working since 2014, I think. But she is still not appointed. She came to me in tears, Mr. Speaker, because she went to the bank on the 25th, on that same day, on Friday. And there was nothing in the bank by way of salary. And you know, Mr. Speaker, that hurt me. But it is not the first time that I've heard those stories. And I want to say here very, very clearly to those people responsible for paying the public officers of this country, it is almost, let me use a different word. It is reprehensible, because nasty is not a good word to use in this honorable chamber, but that's the way I feel about it. It is reprehensible for a person who is guaranteed to go to the bank on payday and find a salary not to be interested in ensuring that others who do not have the luxury of having been appointed can also go to the bank on the day appointed and find salary. That young lady lives in a house with 3 other people. She is the only breadwinner. And she had no money in her account. It has happened to her before. She has now come into a situation where the credit union that she's a member of will not extend any more credit because her credit history is not good. And her credit history is not good, not because she doesn't have a job, but because she's not being paid on time. This Barbados Labour Party government, and the reason why I am so happy and proud to be both a member of this party and a member of the government constituted by this party, is a party that faces these issues frontally. And so, even though some may say it reflects on us because we're in government, it is a matter that is causing people issues, and so it is a matter that we will speak to and address. And I just want to put those persons responsible on notice that we are not prepared to allow this kind of a situation to continue. It is mistreating people. It is not being fair to the ordinary, hard-working public officers of this country who are not yet appointed and who will hear from time to time that their names dropped off of Smart Stream or whatever it is. You know, that is just not the way you treat people. And this government is all about treating people properly. The Ministry of the Public Service, the Honourable Attorney General mentioned this as well, but the Ministry of the Public Service has to, once this is enacted, move swiftly. He already spoke to, you shouldn't say he, no? The Honourable Member. We are not that petty, so there's no issues on our side where that is concerned. But he already spoke to that. But I'm adding my voice to say to the Ministry of the Public Service, now that we've cleared, well, once this is passed, we would have cleared a significant portion of backlog. Once this is done, the Ministry of the Public Service has to get on with the work of dealing both with the anomalies that he's already identified, but also with the regular work of appointing people once they've been in the service for a particular period of time. And that is why we have not changed the 2007 legislation. We have brought a separate piece of legislation because that legislation is still in force. And so the Ministry of the Public Service has a responsibility to the human beings who are working in the public service. in the service of this country to make sure they're treated properly and that they're treated in accordance with the laws of this country. Mr. Speaker, I think that I've said enough in respect of this piece of legislation. As one of the people's representatives chosen to speak on behalf of workers, I commend this bill to this honorable chamber. I commend this bill to the workers of this country. I commend this bill to the organizations who speak on behalf of the workers of this country and say to them that this is not the end of the road. As we recognize deficiencies in the treatment of workers, we will continue to bring to this honorable chamber any necessary pieces of legislation or any amendments to existing pieces of legislation that will seek to improve the lot of workers in this country so that they, Mr. Speaker, can get on comfortably with their work, with leading fulfilled lives, and with contributing significantly to the building of a better Barbados. I'm obliged to you.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the sitting until 2:30 p.m.
The question is that this honorable chamber be suspended until 2:30 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. The ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended until 2:30 p.m.